بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to another session of Bidāyat al-ʿābid wa kifayat al-zāhid, the great Imam al-Ba'di rahimahullah ta'ala. Today we're picking up where we left off in the chapter of purification, specifically looking at sections on the removal of Najasah. We're going to talk about various other types of impurities, and then briefly touch on the natural blood of women, specifically menstrual cycles and postpartum bleeding. So here in this section, we're talking about the rulings related to removing impurities which have soiled something previously pure. In this particular section here of Najasah or Najasat. So the impurities, the Najasah, or what is considered najis or Najasat is the plural of that, the impurities are defined in a linguistic manner to mean that which is repulsive to a person of sound nature. That's what a person would consider najis, impure. That's just like the cultural understanding of the word. There is a specific legal terminology or usage in the terminology of najasa, and that is kullu aynin haruma tanawuluha ma'a imkanihi la li hurmatiha wa la li istiqdariha wa la li dararin biha fi badanin aw aqlin. Basically, this is the technical definition of najasa, which means that it's every tangible substance whose consumption is prohibited while it is physically possible to consume, not due to its sacredness, nor due to its repulsiveness, nor due to any harm it causes the body or mind. And this is considered something inherently impure, the najasa ayniyah, which can never be purified under any circumstance. So the definition here is important to understand when we're talking about najasa itself. And so when the scholars, they define it in this way, any tangible substance whose consumption is prohibited in and of itself while it is physically possible to consume, they are essentially excluding things that cannot be consumed, like stones, etc. These aren't things that are edibles. It's impossible to consume these things, and so you can't legally prohibit the impossible, legally that is. It also excludes things prohibited not because of their essence, like something that is haram due to hurma, right? Its sacred nature, like if you're in the haram, in the sanctuary of Mecca, or in the sanctuary of Medina perhaps, the game animals that are there, you can't hunt them or consume them based on the sanctity that they have, their status, due to their place that they reside. They're prohibited due to the sacred nature, not because they're impure. Right? So it could be an animal that's edible, typically, but because now you're hunting it in the sanctuary, it becomes impermissible. That animal's not najis. Okay. The other part here is about things that are not merely repulsive, like saliva or mucus. While that may be repulsive or off-putting to consume, like you wouldn't eat that or consume it typically, it's avoided because of that, its repulsive nature to eat that. And in the legal code, things that are considered repulsive shouldn't be consumed, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily najis. It doesn't mean that it's impure. Or substances that are harmful to the body, like poisonous plants. Right, so there might be a poisonous plant. It's prohibited to consume that due to the harm that it causes. It doesn't mean that it's impure in and of itself. Or substances that could have an impact, a harmful impact on the mind. There's certain narcotics and medications. The great imams, they mention banj, which is a narcotic. It's an intoxicating plant. It's historically used for like anesthesia or sedation. So it has this really heavy impact on the mind, and because of that, it shouldn't be consumed, but it doesn't mean that it is it doesn't mean that it's impure, right? It shouldn't be consumed unless there's some type of reason to do so. So the author here, so we understand the basic idea of what najasa is and what it's not, because it's a very technical, we have to have a legal understanding of what that is, so we don't start thinking like, oh, I got mud on my pants, that's najis, that's impure, it's dirty, or there's somebody spit on me, or those types of things. We need to understand that this applies in a legal context here. So the author is going to highlight in this section two broad categories of impurity. That which is on the body or clothing as one category, and another category is that which is on the ground, like solid structures. And the first one he's going to talk about is the impurities that get on the body or the clothing, and these have three basic levels. The first level that he looks at is what would be considered the average type of impurity that you're going to try and deal with or manage. And that's what he says here in the text. He says, يُشْتَرَطُ لِكُلِّ مُتَنَجِّسٍ سَبْعُ غَسَلَاتٍ إِنْ أَنْقَتْ وَإِلَّا فَحَتَّى تُنْقَى بِمَاءٍ طَهُورٍ مَعَ حَتٍّ وَقَرْصٍ لِحَاجَةٍ إِنْ لَمْ يَتَضَرَّرِ الْمَحَالِ وَعَصْرٍ مَعَ إِمْكَانٍ فِيمَا تَشَرَّبَ كُلَّ مَرَّةٍ خَارِجَ الْمَاءِ. All right, so we begin here. He says that 7 washes are required for anything contaminated by najasa, so long as they, meaning the 7 washes, cleanse it, that they are able to remove the impurity as is required. If not, that is, if the 7 washes that are required do not prove effective in removing that impurity, then it, the soiled item, must be washed as many times as needed until it is purified. So we get the how we're going to go about this. How do you begin to clean? There's a number of washes that have to occur, a minimum number, okay? For removing any type of impurity, legal impurity, a minimum number must be employed of washings. And then if that doesn't prove effective, then you have to continue to wash additional washings or wash cycles, if you will, until the impurity is removed. What you use, he says, using tahur, water. We've understood the categories of water. Tahur is that which is purifying. Tahir is that which is pure. Okay, so tahur water is used along with scratching and scrubbing if needed, right? So you may need to get in there and you may need to apply some pressure, some cleaning while you're running the water, going through that process. If that's required, you have to do that if this is needed. And this is, as they describe, using the fingertips. It's almost like massaging in the water in order to get that impurity off. Using the fingernails if you have to scratch away something while you're pouring the water over the item. Or you could use tools, brushes, things of that nature. And that is provided that the area that you're washing is not harmed. Okay, so it may be something that you're cleaning that's very delicate, and if you start using a brush on it, you're going to damage that item. You're going to damage what you're being washed. So in the event that it's going to cause damage, then this requirement of scrubbing and scratching and rubbing, etc., is voided. Right? The concept is that your wealth or your property would not be spoiled or damaged in the process of your acts of devotion. Okay, beyond what is considered reasonable usage. We don't want to abuse and spoil the things that we have for the sake of, like purification, etc. So in the event that it's not going to harm the area, then by all means employ these practices of scrubbing and scratching, rubbing or brushing, whatever it may be, in order to get the impurity removed. The next part he says, and wringing out when possible. Wringing out, as we know, you might twist something, like if it's a garment of clothing, you begin to twist so that the water is wrung out. You're trying to get as much of that water out of the object as possible. And this is when you're able to do that, meaning safely, when it's done safely, such that it does not damage the article or the item that you're purifying. If it's even possible in the first place. It might be something that you can't wring out. It's not possible to wring out that thing. And this would be, of course, anything that is absorbent, any absorbent item after each wash, which means that after each of the 7 washes, or beyond, if you have to go beyond 7. So you wash the item, you do what you got to do, and then you wring out the water. And then you wash the item again, cleaning it, trying to remove the impurity, and then you wring out the water. And you go through that cycle, doing that, of course, outside of the water source. Okay? So in the event that you're washing an item of clothing that has some type of najasah on it, and what you're really trying to do is address the najasah itself, not the entire article of clothing, but the location that's been soiled. Okay, so you would start the process, and when it's time for, and if you're using, for example, like a bucket, or you're using a laundry sink to do that, when it's time for you to wring out the water, you don't want to wring that out into the water you're utilizing to clean it. So if you're using a bucket to do that, you don't wring the water out over the bucket, because the water would now fall into the bucket. And what that means is the water's now been contaminated with the najasah that's being washed away, is now falling into that water source. And so when you go to dump your article back into that bucket, what have you done? Reintroduced the najasah to the item you're washing. Okay, so you have to wring the item outside of that water source so that the water doesn't get back into it. And if you remember, the najasah transfers through contact. And water that's on an item is considered pure until that's come in contact with najasah, until it's wrung out or begins to drip off. Once it is detached from the article, that water that came in contact with the najasah is now najas itself. And so by wringing it back into the wash bucket or the sink, now you've polluted your source of water that you're using to wash, and that would have to be dumped out, and new water would have to be introduced to the process. So you don't want to contaminate the water source. And that lends itself to the issue of washing soiled items with najasah in the washing machine today, utilizing the washing machine. Okay, so this is a bit tricky. Depending on how you load the washing machine is going to be everything here. Right, so the best practice is that you wash, if you're using washing machines, and most of us are using a washing machine today, is that you deal with any impurity on soiled garments or items outside of the washing machine first. Right, so if, for example, urine or something of that nature was on a shirt that you needed to wash off, you don't just dump it into the washing machine with the other clothes and let it wash. Rather, you wash it in the sink or in a bucket as described. Once you've gone through the 7 washes, or as needed beyond that, then you can put it in the machine with everything else, and you'll be good to go. Okay? If you wanted to use the washing machine, you're like, look, I don't got time for that, I'm just going to let the machine run. Then, if you're following the madhab, you need 7 cycles, which could be the wash cycle and the rinse cycle that give you 1 cycle each. 1, 2, extra rinse cycle. Some machines have that option, 1, 2, 3. So then you'd have to run that item back through another time for those 3 cycles, and 1 more cycle at the end to get 7 cycles. And the way that it would have to be loaded in is that you put the item in the machine and then you turn the water on. If you were to turn the water on and fill it and then put the item in, then you've introduced najasah into the water. When you put the item in the machine and then turn the water on, the water, it's like you're pouring the water on it and it's on the garment. Hasn't yet left the garment. But you can see even how that could be problematic. Right? So again, the best practice is to deal with those soiled items outside of the washing machine that we use today, so you don't run into confusion or doubt when trying to purify them. Plus, it's excessive in my mind, because again, we're trying to address just the part of the garment that has been soiled, which means you would spot clean, right? If so, something on the sleeve, as I'm indicating here, if there's something on my sleeve that needs to be purified, I don't have to wash the other sleeve. I don't have to wash the main part of the garment. I just have to remove that item, or I have to clean that location itself, so I can deal with just the sleeve and wash it. And then if I felt like, look, I need to wash the entire thing now, then I can deal with it in a different way. All right, so this section addresses the typical situation that you're going to run into of najasat, as I described, like urine, or it's excrement or vomit or something like that that gets on the clothes of the body, things that are considered impure. This is the typical way in which you're going to handle it. The next section addresses the more extreme cases of impurity, which is specific to dogs and pigs. So, وَكَوْنُ إِحْدَاهَا فِي مُتَنَجِّسٍ بِكَلْبٍ أَوْ خِنْزِيرٍ بِتُرَابٍ طَهُورٍ وَيَضُرُّهَا بَقَاءُ طَعْمٍ لَا لَوْنٍ أَوْ رِيحٍ أَوْ هُمَا عَجْزًا. So the first part here that we're looking at is وَكَوْنُ إِحْدَاهَا فِي مُتَنَجِّسٍ بِكَلْبٍ أَوْ خِنْزِيرٍ بِتُرَابٍ طَهُورٍ. So he says that one of the washes, we're still talking about that 7-wash cycle. It's an obligation that it be with tahur, earth. بِتُرَابٍ طَهُور, much like what we would make tayammum with. Or a similar cleaning agent can be utilized instead, like soap. Or certain natural, organic plants and things of that nature that they use in the process of cleansing. And this, for those that are into the natural cleaners, then they would know what plant sources are utilized for cleaning agents. This can be used in lieu of pure earth. And this is if the item was soiled by a dog or a swine or a pig. Being soiled by a dog or a pig, a swine, and that includes any part of those two animals or its excretions. It also includes any hybrid animal it produces, which means any animal with a shared genealogy. As we know, there's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, like anything that is a derivative of that animal. So we often think of a pig, there's like the farm animal, but then there's the relative animals of that creature, okay? And those are included as well. Okay, any hybrid animal that it produces or that is of a similar background, they're included here. And so the process must cover the entire soiled region, again, with the agent now being introduced, whether that's the pure earth or the soap or the cleanser. That has to encompass the entire region that's been soiled by the dog or the pig. So for example, if a dog's saliva got on your shirt or whatever, got on your shirt, for example, go back to this example here with the sleeve, or a dog was wet and brushed up against my sleeve. Remember, if it's wet, that's when you get transfer. So if the dog, we have to understand the dog in its entirety, just like the pig in its entirety, is najis. It's najasatul ayn. Right? The entire thing is najis. Right? So if it comes in contact with you dry, then the najasa is not going to transfer. But if it's wet and it rubs against you, now that water that's gotten on it or that sweat or whatever is also najis, and now it's transferred onto your sleeve. You brushed up against the dog. Now you have to handle this sleeve here. What are you going to do with it? So in the process, you have to introduce within those 7 wash cycles an agent. Soap, pure earth, or something similar. So that's to cover the entire thing. And using this is only going to be voided if the substance would cause damage to the item. again, if you have a delicate article that you're cleaning, that you couldn't use this type of detergent on, or dirt or pure earth on, it would cause it, it would damage it, then you could skip that part of the process. But if it can be, and in this case, then what you would try and do is use the slightest amount such that you could say, or it said, yeah, the agent was used during the process. Even if it was just a little sprinkle of it, right? Just enough to say, yeah, I utilized it because using more of it would cause damage. So now I'm just going to use the most minimal amount so that damage won't be incurred to the item, but the process will be complete as prescribed in the legal code. And if that can't be done, it's foregone altogether, meaning introducing that cleansing agent. When do you use the cleansing agent, one might ask, and what part of the process? It's preferred to integrate the cleansing agent within the first washing. Right? So we know we have 7 washes to perform. We're going to use the cleansing agent on the first time. That's what's preferred. It is permissible, however, to integrate that cleansing agent in any of the washes throughout the process. So first, second, third, all the way to the 7th or beyond, you can use a cleansing agent and you will have fulfilled the requirement of doing so. He says, وَيَضُرُّ بَقَاءُ طَعْمٍ لَا لَوْنٍ أَوْ رِيحٍ أَوْ هُمَا عَجْزًا. So the presence of a remaining taste is harmful. That's what he opens up with. This is the next kind of point here. The presence of a remaining taste is harmful. The taste is an indication that the impurity, the matter of the impurity, is still present. Not that you would try and taste it. At least I don't imagine you would, at least for many things. But theoretically, a taste means the actual matter is still there. And it hasn't been cleansed enough to remove the matter. And that would mean if by the end of 7 washes, the taste of the item remained, you need to wash again and continue to wash through these cycles in order for that to be gone. It means that it's easily removed. If there's a taste, there's still more that has to be removed. He says, but not a color or smell. لا لون أو ريح أو هما عجزا. But not a color or a smell, or both, color and smell, if their removal proves difficult. Meaning that if a color it remains after you've gone through this washing process, the taste of which is now gone, essentially what it's saying is there's a stain left. After being washed, there's this lingering color as a stain, which cannot be removed regardless of what you do. The object will be considered pure so long it has been treated properly. An effort to remove all traces of the impurity have been attempted. Right, so you want to try and remove the color, but in the event that you can't get the color out after you've gone through the process, so long as the actual matter is removed completely, and now you're just dealing with a stain, then the object is being purified properly. So, for example, like a blood stain. Right? You might have a blood stain on an article of clothing. You've gone through the proper cycles of cleaning the article. There's really nothing left there. It's just a matter of there's a stain. All right, so now you can utilize the article of clothing as you normally would when it was purified. So long as you went through the process and you attempted to get it cleansed, then it's all good after that. The same thing goes for an odor. There might be a slight odor remaining behind. As long as you've exercised due diligence, gone through the proper steps, then you could treat it as being pure. If the removal of those odor and color prove difficult, you carry on. All right, so that gives you an idea about these first 2 sections of what's average, what's more extreme. And the next thing that he talks about is something which is much lighter in form of purification. And this has to do with convenience more than anything else. He says, وَيُجْزِئُ فِي بَوْلِ غُلَامٍ لَمْ يَأْكُلْ طَعَامًا لِشَهْوَةٍ نَضْحُهُ وَهُوَ غَمْرُهُ بِمَاءٍ. It says it's sufficient to sprinkle water over the urine of a baby boy. And when he says this here, fi bawli ghulam, he's ruling out the urine of a baby girl. So it doesn't apply to the urine of a baby girl. And he's also ruling out feces of both boy and girl. Those are treated like your average impurity, which we talked about in the first kind of section. And this is also specific to a boy, a baby boy, if you will, who has not yet eaten food out of desire. Essentially, the baby is still breastfeeding. And food is not introduced to their diet because they crave the food. So that means it doesn't rule out a baby that has eaten food which has been fed to them by their parents, not by their own choosing. Like, typically what happens was when you have a new baby boy, there's a tradition that you feed, a new baby in general, you feed the baby a chewed up date. Right? You put that in their mouth, and they'll swallow that. Or there might be some medicines that they might consume. The parents might give them something here or there just to see what their reaction's going to be. Are they ready to eat or not? And see how they might eat it, but they don't actually want that. They still want breast milk, or they still want to be nursed. And so in that case, this is where this applies. They have not yet eaten food out of desire. Okay, so if they start to eat and they're still babies and they start being fed regular whole foods, etc., then the urine is treated like the average impurity. But before that, it's treated simply by sprinkling water over it. And this means, as he says, pouring water until it saturates the spot. So again, the baby boy has urinated and it's gotten on my sleeve. And now in order for me to handle that, to manage that, I'm not required to go wash 7 times here. Okay, like if it was a urine of an adult, I would have to wash that spot 7 times. But now this baby boy's urine, I'm simply going to spray water on top of it until the area becomes saturated, even if the water doesn't begin to drip off the garment, which would indicate an excess amount of water. It's just cover the entire area, saturating the entire spot, then we're done. We're done with that. That's considered pure, and you move on. Okay, and one of the wisdoms behind this, or the reasoning, is that, as I mentioned, convenience. If you've changed a baby boy's diaper versus a baby girl diaper, then you know when you change a baby's boy diaper, you have a much higher risk at getting soiled, simply due to the direction at which that comes out. You feeling me there? It's not going to be contained in a central location. Yeah. What I'm saying is you can get sprayed, and that happens with baby boys. Sometimes they even wait for that. They're waiting for you to take the diaper off, and then they get you. Right? And so in order to lighten the burden on the parents for the baby boys, there is some convenience factor that plays in here. The next section deals with solid surfaces, and this is where we get into that next category of the two. Right, the first category, we had 3 levels. We covered the average, the extreme, and the lightened. And now we look at the second section altogether. He says, وَفِي نَحْوِ صَخْرٍ وَأَحْوَالٍ وَأَرْضٍ تَنَجَّسَتْ بِمَاءٍ وَلَوْ مِنْ كَلْبٍ أَوْ خِنْزِيرٍ مُكَاثَرَتُهُمَا بِمَاءٍ حَتَّى يَذْهَبَ لَوْنُ النَّجَاسَةِ وَرِيحُهَا مَا لَمْ يَعْجَزْ عَنْ إِذْهَابِهِمَا أو إذهاب أحدهما ولو لم يزل الماء فيهما أي في بول الغلام وفي الأرض ونحوها فيطهران مع بقاء الماء عليها. So here we're talking about solid structures in general, what's on the ground, etc. So he says stone or constructed basins. He also includes whether large or small, pools, ḥayḍ, pools, and the ground that have been soiled with liquid, even that of a dog or a swine, are purified by pouring abundant water over them without considering the number of times it's poured. If you remember, we had 7 washings in the previous section. Here, we're not concerned about the number of times. What we are concerned about is the amount of water that's used. It has to be an abundant amount. And this is done, meaning not being concerned with the number of times, to ease hardship and to remove any difficulty. And of course, this process, or this water, is poured in abundant until the color and the smell of the impurity and the visible substance are removed. So we want to get it all out. We want the actual matter itself to be washed away. We want any remaining smell and color to be washed away with that water. Right? So this may require a good amount of water. Unless, he says, one is unable to eliminate both, meaning the color or the smell. So you have to be able to wash away the matter. If there's physical matter of impurity, it has to be washed away. If it's not, you have to keep pouring. You have to keep putting water until it's removed. But if you can't eliminate the color or the smell, again, that goes back to like there's a stain now that's left. There's a slight odor that's now kind of like become embedded within that item. It's hard to get rid of. As long as the matter's been removed and you've made an attempt to get rid of the smell and the odor, then the surface is going to be considered pure. If you do not make an attempt, then it's not considered pure yet. You have to go through the process. He says if the water remains afterward, after you've poured all this water and there's some that still remains, in the case of a boy's urine, for example, we've already discussed that, how that works, the water's going to still be there, or the ground and the like with the basin or the pool, they're considered pure, even with the water present. And one might ask, well, it's come in contact with Najasah, etc. So again, the concept here is we're dealing with difficulties and hardships and trying to make some concessions in order to remove that hardship because it may not be possible, or it may be overburdensome in order to remove the water that you've poured all over the ground now in order to get that completely off. So long as the matter of it's no longer visible, it's no longer present, and you've gone through the process of trying to cleanse and purify, then that will be sufficient, inshallah. He goes on to the next part. He says, وَلَا تَطْهُرُ أَرْضٌ بِشَمْسٍ وَرِيحٍ وَجَفَافٍ وَلَا نَجَاسَةٌ بِنَارٍ فَرَمَادُهَا نَجِسٌ وَتَطْهُرُ خَمْرَةٌ إِنْ قَلَبَتْ خَلًّا بِنَفْسِهَا أو بنقل لا لقصد التخليل ودنها مثلها. Okay, so here's an important section for us. He says, land is not purified by sunlight, wind, or dryness. Meaning here, let's say, for example, there's a spot on the ground that someone or something is urinated on. All right? You cannot just leave it there for it to dry and now consider that spot pure. It may have dried, it may have evaporated. Whatever's there hasn't been purified, that spot. You still have to go through the process. Okay, so that's not enough for the area to have been cleansed of its impurity. Well, maybe the wind came and just caused it to accelerated the evaporation process, or blew the thing away. It's not enough. You got to go through the process of purifying that with the water, pouring an abundant amount of water. The next part is about impurity, changing state. He says impurity is not purified by fire, like to burn something, to try and burn it away, cleanse it. If it is burnt, its ashes remain najis, as does the smoke, the steam, and any dust that's produced from that burning process. That's all considered najis, because essentially nothing changes in this case in terms of purity. The only thing that's changing now is the physical state of the thing. The physical state of it. Now it's ash, now it's smoke, now it's steam. It's just changed state, It hasn't changed its nature of being pure or impure. So here it's impure. You set it on fire, and you get something different at the end. It's just a pile of ashes. The ashes, they're impure. You didn't go through the process. And this kind of lends itself to what's referred to as istihala, which is a process of change that a thing goes through. Often referred to today as like a chemical change. And in the madhab, an impurity, or something which has been as an impurity itself, an impurity is not purified through istihala, through this transformation. A chemical transformation, it's not purified according to the madhab. So you could take a product, for example, let's say an animal byproduct from pig sources or non-dhabiha halal animals. And you could take it and put it through a chemical change such that it now is not what it used to be chemically, but it's been altered, its state, its physical chemical state has been altered into something else. That process does not purify it. So these are like what we would deal with in ingredients in food in particular, sometimes in medicines, sometimes in cleansing agents, where they have an animal derivative or an animal product that they have now put through a chemical change and introduced it into the makeup of a particular product or food. So that chemical change does not change its state of impurity. That's why looking at the ingredients and understanding where the sources of these things come from is important for us. Again, hinting at the relationship between our spiritual health and what it is that we consume. And again, this is known as istihala. And there's a lot that's been said about this, debates back and forth. Like many issues in this subject, you'll find a plethora of information and argumentation. However, the madhab is clear that it is not purified, at least the mu'tamad is, that it is not purified at this process. And the author hints at this when he says, وَتَطْهُرُ خَمْرَةٌ إِنْ قَلَبَتْ خَلًّا بِنَفْسِهَا أَوْ بِنَقْلٍ لَا لِقَصْدِ التَّقْلِيلِ وَدَنُّهَا مِثْلُهَا. He's talking about how vinegar, it changes, like alcohol changes to vinegar. There's a process by which alcohol, khamr, is changed into vinegar. And the only way that that chemical process would purify the thing is if it was naturally occurring. So if there was alcohol, you'd have to let it be and naturally acidify in order for it to become vinegar, purified enough for purified for consumption. If you are manipulating that and trying to acidify that alcohol on your own, like there's our intervention is introduced to the process, then it doesn't become pure. It has to be done through a natural process where that happens on its own, not because we're intervening in the process trying to accelerate or control. So that kind of gives you an idea of even there might be an exception here. If it's a naturally occurring process of change, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated in His creation, and it changes into something else, then that case would be acceptable. And then he says, the last part here, its storage vessel is treated the same as, meaning as the alcohol itself. So if the alcohol is in some type of storage container, and it were to naturally change into vinegar, then the alcohol vessel, the thing that's the container that it's in, is now also pure. Whereas one time it was in contact with alcohol, which is an impurity, Najasah. So that thing would be treated as it's mutanajjis. It's become purified. And now that the alcohol has changed, that thing has changed along with it. The state of that has changed as well. It says, وَإِنْ خُفِيَتْ نَجَاسَةٌ غَسَلَ حَتَّى يُتَيَقَّنُ غَسْلُهَا. The last part here, he says, if the najasa becomes hidden, the item must be washed until its washing is certain. And basically what we're talking about there is if you have a najasa, you know you got your let's use my shirt again as the example. I know that the shirt was soiled with najasah. I know that something got on there, urine or whatever the case may be. But before I got to it, it dried, and I could no longer see the traces, the location. Now is hidden. It's concealed from me. I couldn't figure it out. So I can't just take a guess and say, all right, maybe it was here, and just wash just wash one spot. But what I have to do is I have to now wash it enough until I am certain that I've addressed the issue properly. Right, so that might be for me practically. If I knew that it got on like the sleeve, I wouldn't need to wash the rest of the garment. But now I don't know exactly where on the sleeve it was. And so what I would do is I would wash the entire sleeve, so that I was certain that I got the location that was soiled clean. And I would go through the process of, depending on what type of najasah it was, I would go through the process of washing it 7 times, wringing it out each time, etc., etc. All right? So that's how you would treat something that has become hidden to you. You would have to continue until you reach a level of certainty, because you're certain that it's there, and the only way that you can remove certainty is through certainty itself. You can't remove certainty based on assumption. Okay, the next part here is talking about various other impurities. Al-muskiru al-ma'iyu, he says here, the liquid intoxicants. وَمَا لَا يُؤْكَلُ مِنَ الطَّيْرِ وَالْبَهَائِمِ مِمَّا فَوْقَ الْحِرِّ خِلْقَةً نَجِسٌ وَكُلُّ مَيْتَةٍ نَجِسَةٌ غَيْرَ مَيْتَةِ الْآدِمِ وَالسَّمَكِ وَالْجَرَادِ. الْمَيْتَةِ and not al-dhabiha. We hinted at that earlier, maybe in a previous lesson. All right? Okay, so here he says, liquid intoxicants and the inedible birds and beasts that are physically larger than a cat are najis. So inanimal birds, inedible, meaning that which you're not permitted to eat. You're not permitted to eat, it's not just pig you can't eat as a Muslim, but there are other animals that are impermissible to eat, like predatory animals, lions and tigers and bears, etc. The animals that consume other animals. The same thing goes for birds. There are birds that you cannot consume. Those are the birds that also consume other beasts. The Prophet ﷺ described them, the animals that have the canine tooth, and birds that have the talons that they utilize for hunting, etc. These are the animals that are inedible. And so any of those animals in that category that are physically larger than a cat are considered najis. All right? They're najasah. He also says every carcass is najis, except that of a human, fish, or locust. So the human being, due to its sanctity, is not considered najasah even after it passes away. You have a dead body, it's not considered najis. It's considered pure, ṭāhir. As is a fish, that means that if you're into seafood, it doesn't matter if the fish was caught live and dispatched, meaning it was like killed, slaughtered, or if it was caught dead. You reeled it in, and you realized the fish is already dead. It might have died on the way in. Who knows? It's still ṭāhir and it's edible. And the same thing goes for locusts. As you know, those are insects. I'm not sure many are eating those these days. They're considered ṭāhir. And then as I hinted at, mayta, so the animals that are edible, obviously, when you slaughter them, you go through the process of al-dhabiha. That's what makes that dead body pure and edible. Which means that if you were to come across a cow, which we can eat, it's an edible animal, the cow is halal, as is a chicken is halal, and various other animals like those are halal. A goat or a lamb, it's halal meat. But when you come across it dead, like for example, you just stumbled across it like a roadkill. Some people eat that, by the way. They go hunting for the roadkill. They'll find a fresh deer and they'll take it home, they'll process it. We could eat deer in Islam, but not a roadkill animal, because that's considered meta, and it's a carcass, so it's impure. You can't consume impurity, najas. Right? So when you're dealing with the typical things, like what we typically eat, like beef and lamb and goat and chicken and stuff, if the animal was not slaughtered in the appropriate manner, it's not purified through the process. And so the body there is now considered meta, and it's najas. Right? So that's something that you got to be aware of in order to be weary of. And the principle is that that when it comes to consumable animals, they're impermissible until slaughtered. Right? The animals have to be made permissible by way of slaughter. He says, يُعْفَى عَنْ يَسِيرِ الطِّينِ شَارِعٍ عُرْفًا إِنْ عُلِمَتْ نَجَاسَتُهُ وَإِلَّا فَهُوَ طَاهِرٌ. So here he says a small amount, and this is according to custom, meaning what's customarily a small amount of street dirt that is known to be najas is excused. Known to be najas here means that you realize that what you're walking on in the street, there's najasa there. And if it's just a small amount, then that's overlooked within the legal code of purification, because, again, that is a difficulty to avoid. If you're thinking about previous days where, you know, you're walking on, even today, you're walking on, you're out in the neighborhoods or on the streets, and you know, like, look, I see my neighbor walking the dog up and down. And you know what they do. Who knows? They've gone here, they've gone there, they've gone everywhere by now. Okay? A little bit of dirt that might hold some of that najasa there, if it were to get on you, a small amount of it would be overlooked in order to avoid the difficulty of trying to avoid all of that all of the time. And he says, otherwise it is considered tahir, meaning that if you don't know, if you're uncertain, maybe you just have an assumption that it could be najas, then you deal with it as if it is pure. Amalan bil asal. Basically, you're treating it as it would normally be. Under normal circumstances, those things are pure objects, dirt, etc. And so you're going to treat them as such if you're just basing it on assumption and not basing it on certainty. So in cases of certainty, a little bit can be overlooked. Cases of assumption, you just treat it like it normally is, as pure. He says, وَلَا يُكْرَهُ سُؤْرُ حَيَوَانٍ طَاهِرٍ وَهُوَ فَضْلَةُ طَعَامِهِ وَشَرَابِهِ غَيْرَ الدَّجَاجَةٍ مُخَلَّاتٍ وَفَأْرٍ وَلَوْ أَكَلَ حِرٌّ وَنَحْوُهُ أَوْ طِفْلٌ نَجَاسَةً ثُمَّ شَرِبَ وَلَوْ قَبْلَ أَنْ يَغِيبَ مِنْ مَاءٍ يَسِيرٍ فَطَهُورٌ. Okay, so here he says the leftover food and drink of a tahir animal is not disliked. The leftover food and drink of a tahir animal is not disliked to be consumed. Okay, because the animal is tahir, when they go eating and drinking, essentially meaning that there's going to be some transfer of something happening there. Eating and drinking from a source, then they've come in contact with the source of food or water. It's not disliked. Except that of free-roaming chickens, as he mentions here, the dajaja mukhalla, that's a free-roaming chicken. It's not something that you've kept caged or pinned, but it's a chicken that's just roaming around, or a mouse. So we understood the mouse is a small animal. It's not najas, but it will go and eat from things, get inside of things, as a free-roaming chicken does. And the problem with these creatures in particular is that they're known for consuming najasat. Especially a free-roaming chicken, they'll just eat any old thing. And they get into your source of food, and you understand what could happen. The same thing with a mouse. It could get into your source of food and start rummaging around there, eating from it. And this could lead to, and some of them point out, some medical conditions and otherwise. It says, if a cat or similar animal, this is the next line, وَلَوْ أَكَلَ حِرٌّ وَنَحْوُهُ, if a cat or a similar animal, meaning like a similar size animal of that category, or a child, they eat najasah. And this is atypical. They eat najasah, ثُمَّ شَرِبَ وَلَوْ قَبْلَ أَنْ يَغِيبَ. Then they were to drink from a small quantity of water, مِن مَاءٍ يَسِيرٍ فَطَهُورٌ. And this is even before the najasah has completely left the mouth. Then drinking from that source of water is still considered, that source of water is still considered purified. And again, this has to do with trying to avoid discomfort or hardship that this could happen. And you're trying to avoid the hardship that it would amount to in trying to manage it every time it were to occur. All right? And that basically concludes the section on removing impurities and how to deal with various different types of impurities. The next section is about the natural blood of women. Imam al-ʿābid rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, opening the chapter, وَأَقَلُّ سَنِّ الْحَيْض تَمَامُ تِسْعِ سِنِينَ وَأَكْثَرُهُ خَمْسُونَ سَنَةً وَالْحَامِلُ لَا تَحِيض. So essentially here, the earliest age of menstruation is the completion of 9 years. Again, we're looking at the Hijra calendar, not the other calendars. And the latest is 50. A pregnant woman does not menstruate. And what that means is the earliest age of menstruation being 9 years, if a girl of 8 years were to see blood, that's not treated as menstrual blood. Okay, it's treated as something different. And so the rulings of menstrual blood are not applied to her at this age. That doesn't begin until 9 years. And then that's the earliest age. And the latest age is 50. As he says, وَأَكْثَرُهُ خَمْسُونَ سَنَةً. Right, so anything beyond that, a woman now into her 50s is experiencing this natural blood, even if it is similar to her menstrual cycle, it's not treated as the same legally. She's not going to treat that blood as menstrual blood. Now it's like istihada, it's like pseudo-menstruation, and that has a different ruling to it. Okay, so you basically get up until 50, and then after that, even if, so this is the thing, someone might say, well look, biologically, even scientifically, they say it's possible now, etc., and it can go on and go on for however long it goes on until it naturally comes to its conclusion. We're not talking about biological rules here, we're talking about religious legal code. We have to distinguish between the two. There's one set of natural biological rules, and there's one set of rules that apply to the legal code as has been established by the Prophet ﷺ. And we can see this example being applied throughout the lives of the women that were around him. All right, so again, as an issue of fiqh, of Islamic jurisprudence, you're going to find a debate surrounding these topics, different opinions. But again, in terms of learning, or in terms of having adopted a particular method, this one in particular, this gives you the parameters for determining whether it's menstrual blood or not, just based on age alone. And then again, he says, as he says here, a pregnant woman does not menstruate. Pregnant woman does not menstruate. So if she does experience some type of bleeding while pregnant, it's not considered menstrual blood, and she carries on as she normally would. وَأَقَلُّهُ يَوْمٌ وَلَيْلَةٌ وَأَكْثَرُهُ 15 يَوْمًا وَغَالِبُهُ 6 أو 7 وأقل الطهر بين الحيضتين 13 يوما وغالبه بقية الشهر ولا حد لأكثره. Its minimum duration is 1 day and 1 night of menstrual bleeding. The minimum duration, meaning if it's less than this, 1 day and 1 night, it's not considered menstrual bleeding. You have to have breached this minimum time period for you to act accordingly. And its maximum is 15 days. So that means a woman could experience a legal menstrual cycle for 15 days and no more. Even if she continued to see blood, after the 15th day, she no longer treats it like a menstrual cycle. In the event that she was having a prolonged period, then at 15 days, you're done. And then you carry on as you normally would, factoring in, if it's istihala, etc., and that'd be a topic for another time. He says, however, most often it is 6 or 7 days. The cycle is typically 6 or 7 days. The shortest period of purity between two menstrual cycles is 13 days. Okay, so typically here, the shortest period between two menstrual cycles is going to be, he says, 13 يوما. Meaning in the event that from one menstrual cycle to the next, you didn't surpass these 13 days. So 10 days after your previous menstrual cycle, you started noticing blood again, then you would say, look, we're not done with our minimum period of purity. And so we're going to treat this not like menstrual blood, but istihala. We're going to treat this like something else and act accordingly. We have to get to that 13th day mark in order for us to be applicable for the rules of menstrual cycle. Most often it is the remainder of the month, meaning that if you have whatever your period was, the time, if it was 6, 7, 8 days, then the remainder of the month is typically what is going to be your time period of purity. That's what's normal. This is the averages. These are what is considered averages. So, as he mentions, al-ʿābid, right? Wal-ḥukm al-ʿābid. That's the general principle, right? The ruling is based on what's prevalent. What's prevalent is a woman's going to experience a 6 to 7 day menstrual cycle, and then the remaining days of the month are going to be a period of purity. And then she'll experience another menstrual cycle, and it will continue like that, and she'll develop in what's known as an ḥayḍ. There's like a customary time frame for her period, and she can track that. And within the madhab, there are certain rules that we'll say for a more advanced course on how the mubtada'a, which is the one who has just started her menstrual cycle, how she begins to establish that ḥayḍ and the various rules that relate to that in terms of any variations that occur throughout the process. And then he says, وَلَا حَدَّ لِأَكْثَرِهِ. There is no maximum limit for at-tuhur, which is a state of purity, meaning there's no menstrual cycle. Okay, so while there is a limit for how long the menstrual cycle can be, there is no limit for how long a woman can go without a menstrual cycle. So it could be that a woman could go multiple years without experiencing a menstrual cycle. And this is not uncommon. This does happen. It's not like a one-off chance that this happens. This happens, it can happen in people that are very physically active, like, for example, like marathon runners and trainers, women that are into that heavy level of training, where their body is being exerted and they're expending their nutrition rapidly. The body can withhold that process, or women that are malnourished, or there'd be a multitude of reasons why a woman may go a longer period than simply the duration of a month, the remainder of the month for them to experience their next menstrual cycle. It can go for quite some time, and that should not cause unnecessary shock or create some level of doubt in how they would proceed in terms of their religious practice. You just treat it like any other time in which they're not experiencing their menstrual cycle. They continue to pray and to fast as they normally would. He says here, وَيَحْرُمُ عَلَيْهَا فِعْلُ صَلَاةٍ وَلَا تَقْضِيهَا وَفِعْلُ صَوْمٍ وَتَقْضِيهِ وَوَطْئُهَا فِي فَرْجٍ وَيَجِبُ فِيهِ دِينَارٌ أَوْ نِصْفُهُ كَفَارَةً وَتُبَاحُ الْمُبَاشَرَةُ فِيمَا دُونَهُ. Okay, we'll stop there. It says here, it is impermissible for her to perform prayer, meaning the woman that's experiencing this bleeding, the prayer that she misses while on her cycle or during the postpartum bleeding period is not made up. They're excused from that prayer totally. And she's also not permitted to fast during that cycle. But the days of fasting are to be made up. She's not permitted to engage in intercourse, for which, if it were done on a menstrual cycle, 1 or a half dinar is owed as an expiation. Essentially, there's a penalty for engaging in such an act. And there are, that you might say there is an exception to that rule, engaging in intimacy while the woman's on her menstrual cycle. But I think that might be a topic for another time. It's a dire situation. And it's kind of one that the brothers would discuss in private circles. All right. Where are we at here? وَتُبَاحُ الْمُبَاشَرَةُ فِي مَا دُونَهُ. He says here, physical intimacy short of that is permitted. So we're talking about here the impermissibility of the act of intimacy, the act of intercourse, and we've defined what that is. If you remember when we talked about what the requirements of ghusl were, or what requires a ghusl, we talked about what intercourse is in a legal sense, and we understand it in general what it means. However, other intimate acts are permitted. It's a side note here that I think is relevant, is important, and what I'm trying to make sure I don't do is dive too deep into the topic so we don't get bogged down in the nuances and the details. It's not the intent of the author of this particular manual. Bidāyat al-ʿābid is meant to be kind of just introducing you to the main points, and then as we progress, inshallah, if we're interested, we can look at more intricate works of the similar topic, and we just build layers until we have this very robust understanding of the details of how we practice our religion. But there is a point that he mentions in his explanation. It's rather detailed, but it has to do with incontinence, which is where a person experiences uncontrollable flow of urine, even if it's very light. It's like a constant dribble or drop of urine that happens. It's uncontrollable. And this is experienced oftentimes after trauma to the body or due to old age. They begin to lose control of these functions. This also applies to medhi, which is the pre-orgasmic fluid, where there's a constant flow of this happening, even if it's just like very slight and subtle. Or we could be talking about regular nosebleeds. Like the person has nosebleeds all the time, constantly the nose is bleeding. So how is a person to deal with that? That's an issue that comes up from time to time. And so obviously you have to deal with these things in the proper manner, because we're talking about Najasah. All right, so the Imam mentions this here in the text. All right, so the question to that is, it's obligatory upon anyone whose state of ritual impurity is ongoing, such as a mustahadah. We've talked about that, as a woman who's experiencing bleeding which is not considered menstruation, or someone suffering from urinary incontinence, continuous medhi, even continuous uncontrollable flatulence, or a wound is also included that does not stop bleeding, or a persistent nosebleed. So all of these things are lumped together. So what they do is, number one, they wash the area soiled by the impurity in order to remove the impurity itself, and then they cover that area or bind it, like with a bandage or cloth, gauze, etc., taking all reasonable steps to prevent the impurity from exiting. Right? So in the case of incontinence, this is urinary incontinence, you would put something on your body, and they make these things now. You can find them in the market, like Depends, etc., those types of things. or you use something in order to wrap that body part such that you would bind it closed so that the impurity doesn't come out. You try your best, knowing that it's probably unlikely that it's going to do the job, or you put cotton inside of it. Like if it's an orifice or a wound, or it's an open part of it, you put cotton, you stuff cotton in there like you would a wound, you fill it with, you pack it, and then you wrap it with pure cotton. And if you're unable to do any of that, then you would just continue and pray as you typically would based on any condition. So you would do that process of washing and binding, etc. And then it's not obligatory to repeat the washing and binding for each prayer so long as one has not been negligent in doing that. They took care of it in the best way possible because the impurity that they're experiencing is overwhelming. It's continuous. And it cannot be reasonably prevented or stopped. So they would wrap it up and do it, and then they would move on, not having to deal with it regularly. And then one who suffers from, so that has to do specifically with a wound and anything else. But then the next portion here that you have to consider is if it is an ongoing hadith, you have to perform bulūgh. Okay? You're in a constant state of impurity where we've talked about what constitutes that. Then at the time of each prayer, you have to perform bulūgh. If anything exits, you have to perform bulūgh. This is because it's a case of ritual purification for an excuse, which therefore is tied to the time of prayer, similar to tayammum. That means that it would expire based on the time. If nothing exits, obviously wudu is not invalidated. So you might have a break during that period of incontinence or whatever you're experiencing. There might be a break. It's long enough for more than one prayer. And if you're experiencing such a break, then you don't need to refresh your wudu. In the event that you don't have a break and it's continuous, then you would make a wudu for the next prayer and you would continue forward. As I said, much like a tayammum is treated in that regard. All right, the last part here we're looking at is nifās, and this is postpartum bleeding. والنفاس لا حد لأقله وأكثره 40 يوما ويثبت حكمه بوضع ما يتبين فيه خلق الإنسان والنقاء زمنه طهر ويكره الوطء فيه وهو كالحيض في أحكامه غير عدة وبلوغ. So here he says there's no minimum for postpartum bleeding. لا حد لأقله وأكثره 40 يوما. There's no minimum for postpartum bleeding. Its maximum is 40 days. So it may be that the postpartum blood ends rather rapidly and you're done. It may be that it's excessive and lasts longer. If it exceeds 40 days, then whatever is beyond the 40th day is considered, it's not considered nifās. It's a different thing altogether. So you would wrap up that period of postpartum bleeding legally, again, in the Islamic code. I'm not talking about what's happened scientifically or biologically. We're talking about a time frame that has been allotted for this in our religion. After that, you would carry on. It says its rulings apply once that which is delivered has distinguishable human form. The rulings of nifās, this experiential bleeding, begin once the human, what is distinguishable as a human, is delivered. Which means we're excluding, if a woman were to go through an early stage pregnancy or have a miscarriage and whatever comes out is not distinguishable. You can't see human-like form. You don't see limbs. You don't see hands. You don't see a head. You just see, it's just organic matter from the womb of the woman. We don't say now she has a period of nifās for whatever comes after that. The nifās starts once whatever is delivered has a human form. And more likely than not, it's a baby. I mean, you're having a live baby, right? These are rare instances and occasions which do occur that the pregnancy is so early and whatever has been delivered is not distinguishable as an actual human being. So we have to make a distinction between the two things. And this is even if the pregnancy was induced. The ruling applies once that happens, once that is delivered, even if it's by induction or it's by trauma. The woman goes through a trauma like a physical trauma. She's been in an accident or something's happened, ma'adallah, and now it's pushed her body to expel what's in her womb. Then you have to look, what was expelled? Is it this or is it that? Okay? وَزَمَنُهُ, he says, زَمَنُهُ وَالنَّقَاءُ زَمَنُهُ طُهُرٌ. وَالنَّقَاءُ here, any period of cleanliness within that time is treated as purity. Cleanliness meaning the blood ceased. Within that 40-day period, if the blood ceases, now we're treating it as a time of purity. Okay? وَيُكْرَهُ الْوَطْءُ فِيهِ, meaning that within the 40 days, regardless of what happens, right? If it's pure, meaning if she's purified, the blood stops. It's still considered disliked. It's still considered disliked in that case. And that, of course, would mean وَالنَّقَاءُ زَمَنَهُ, meaning the time of nifās, طُهُرٌ, is pure. وَيُكْرَهُ الْوَطْءُ فِيهِ أي فِي النِّقَاءِ زَمَنَهُ بَعْدَ الْغُسْلِ. There's a purified time during that 40-day period after a ghusl has been performed. Then it's considered disliked to engage in intercourse with the woman. I mean, you can imagine the body's going through what it's going through, just delivered a baby. We got to pump the brakes. It's disliked. Doesn't mean haram. It's disliked, you know what I mean? Take that into consideration. And he concludes there, he says, وَهُوَ كَالْحَيْضِ, it's just like menstruation, فِي أَحْكَامِهِ, in its various rulings, except for غَيْرَ عِدَّةٍ, he says, غَيْرَ عِدَّةٍ, which basically means like a nifās لَا يَصِحُ الْاعْتِدَادُ بِهِ. A nifās is not considered a time in which you calculate an iddah period. وَغَيْرُ bulūgh فَلَا يَحْكُمُ بِبُلūغِهَا مِنْ حِينِ النِّفَاسِ بَلْ مِنْ حِينِ الْإِنزَالِ. All right? So you don't say that a girl that's pregnant is now pubescent when she begins to experience the blood of birth. It would be before that, right? حين الإنزال. We talked about what that means previously. Right? So she would already be pubescent on the fact that she's now pregnant. She's treated as a full-grown woman. Basically, she has all the various obligations and moral duties that a pubescent woman would have. And that's where we're going to conclude for today. Jazakallah khair. Appreciate your attendance and your attentive listening. And we'll pick up here. We're going to begin the